Now, the anger over that lack of provincial alert is particularly strong in the case of Lillian Hyslop. She was killed on Sunday morning when she went out for her regular walk. As the shooting unfolded, one of Lillian's friends tried to call her to warn her, but it was too late. That friend was Debi Atkinson, and we've reached her this morning in Wentworth, Nova Scotia. Debi, thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you.
You were just listening to Kayla's report. Why don't I just begin overall whether you would support what you heard from a number of the other people in your community, what should have been done differently in this case as far as the alert was concerned?
I think that when they seen how serious the incident was in Port-a-Pic at that time is when the alert should have went out. Then everybody in Nova Scotia would have had it when they got up in the morning. They could have then started checking the internet, listening to the radio, friends calling friends, and everybody would have been informed.
But that's not what happened, as we now know. In your own particular case, as I understand it, was a friend who gave you a phone call to sort of tell you what was going on. And when you then had that information personally, what did you do?
Actually, it wasn't until 10 o'clock in the morning that my friend called me. By then, he had already gone through the Wentworth area, but we didn't know that. She just said that there was somebody, the killer was on the loose. He was driving a police car to let everybody know, lock your doors, let everybody know. So all of a sudden I just started calling everybody that I knew that I seen walking every day, and everybody that was staying in Wentworth. And one of the people that I called was Lillian's mother-in-law, Carol Hyslop, and I said, "Tell Lillian not to be walking today." And I told her that there was somebody on the loose driving a police car, and for her to stay home. And she thanked me and said she would call them right away. So then I called numerous people and found out that somebody else was doing the same thing at the same time. And I said, it doesn't matter if we call the same people over and over, let's just try to get everybody.
So there was this big network of phone calls going on, everybody trying to reach people that they knew, to warn them, to keep them safe. But as we know so tragically, it was too late for Lillian Hyslop. And I'm wondering, when you learned that in fact that she had been killed wearing that safety vest as she went out for her regular walk, what was your reaction?
I think it's just not us. I think everybody in the community feels anger about it. I think that some of the cases couldn't have been prevented, but I think there were some that could have. And having that alert out, I'm sure that in a rural community like this, everybody would have stayed in the house locked down. And even now, everybody's still calling everybody, checking on them, seeing how they're coping with the situation. And everybody would have been more aware to check the internet and check the radios and stay on top of the updates.
Had there been one of these emergency alerts? What we've heard, as I was mentioning at the beginning of our broadcast, Debi, was the government has said it was ready to go with one of those alerts, but it didn't get any information from the RCMP as to what to put out. And the RCMP has said that they chose to use Twitter instead because they have major networks of and thousands of followers there. What do you think of their answers and explanations?
Well, I don't think Twitter is a good example to use. I think more people would use Facebook than they'd use Twitter. Since this is all over, I've learned that maybe 100,000 people in Nova Scotia use Twitter, and we have probably a population of at least 950,000 people. So that's not getting the message out to everybody. Just on Easter weekend, they tested the system for the COVID virus, and when our cell phones started beeping, everybody ran to the cell phones, to check to see what the message was. So I think that the message would have been so much clearer at that time by going through the cell phones. Most people nowadays have cell phones. I don't know of any of my friends here in Wentworth that have a Twitter account.
So they didn't get that information, except for that telephone network and the people like you trying to call friends and warn them. But as you said, you've tested the alert system before, you know it works. In your view, it would have been effective. And you kind of hinted at this already, but in conclusion, had there been alerts, what do you think would have changed?
Well, I'm sure that Lillian would have still been home with her husband, enjoying the day. probably some of the people in Debert and some of the other killings wouldn't have happened either, because, you know, you see a police car with a police officer and you think that you're safe. Even with his name out there, I think that anybody that knew him and realized what had happened in Portapique would have went in hiding and would have been much more aware of you know, who was coming to the door, or they might not have even stayed in their homes. They would have went to safety somewheres. That I really think that a lot of lives could have been saved by the Amber Alert, and everybody in Wentworth feels the same way, that we should have been warned.
Debi Atkinson, I thank you for the time this morning, your perspective on things. Police say they'll certainly be asking questions and reviewing how they handled this, and clearly this is one of the big questions for most people right now. Thank you very much, Debi, for joining us.
Thank you.